For those of you who don't know, I served the Kansas City community since 1955 with the mission of encouraging civic engagement and dialogue around world events and global issues. We are commemorating our 70th anniversary as an organization. Our commitment to the community is stronger than ever. Thank you so much for those of you who are members of the organization. If you're not, we very much encourage you to consider that. It gets you a discounted program, prices, gets you access to a wonderful community of people who have a myriad of experiences across the world. The war in Ukraine is now entered its 4th year as of yesterday, and this conflict has become one of the most defining geopolitical stories of the 2020s. Today we will be discussing the far-reaching regional effects of the war in Ukraine throughout Europe. We will have time for questions at the end, so if you do have any, we will just ask you to raise your hand, speak your question loudly, and we'll attempt to address as many of those as we have the time to do. If you need to use the restroom, probably the best way is to go back to the doors where you arrived and should be able to find them there. I'd also like to take some time to let you know that the William Jewell series is presenting the Czech National Symphony tonight at the Kaufman Center. The show begins at 7 p.m. and tickets are still available. It's a really unique opportunity to have the National Symphony here in Kansas City.
Or record films.
Now, before I introduce our moderator, Sharon Blanchard, who's the honorary consul in Czech Republic in Kansas and Missouri, I would like to play a quick video from Jakub Utevny, who was appointed the Consul General of the Czech Republic in Chicago in August 2023, with jurisdiction over 11 states: Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. Before coming to Chicago, Jakub Utevny was in charge of the Department of Preparation and Coordination for the Czech presidency of the EU Council at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Prague. So I'm going to play that video quick, and then we'll invite Sharon to come up, and then we will be off and running. So thank you so much, everyone. Start in 1 moment.
I wish I could be with you in person today at the Kansas City Library. Unfortunately, other commitments have kept me away, but I'm incredibly grateful to the International Relations Council and Czech Honorary Consul for Kansas and Missouri, Sharon A. Balash, for making it possible for me to join you virtually, because what we are talking about today can be more urgent and topical. Let me start by asking you a question. Have you ever driven from Kansas City to Oklahoma City? It's a relatively short trip, about 400 kilometers, and that's roughly the same distance between the borders of Czech and Ukraine. Now imagine this. Some 100 years ago, cities like Interagency and Interagency were not part of Ukraine, or actually within Czechoslovakia. So we share not only geographical proximity, but also very deep historical ties with Ukraine. And that's also why for many Czechs, the war in Ukraine doesn't feel distant, it feels close, very close. We also remember what it's like to have foreign troops on our streets. In 1968, Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia, and the invasion and occupation that followed lasted more than 2 decades, leaving devastating scars on our society and economy. So we understand why Ukrainians are fighting, and we support them. 10 years ago, Russia illegally annexed Crimea. 3 years ago, the aggression escalated into a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a brutal war that still rages today and can see. Many people believe Ukraine would survive long. Some thought it would be over in weeks, maybe months. But here we are. Ukraine is still standing and still fighting. Russia, well, despite all its might, has not broken Ukraine's spirit. Ukrainians are fighting for their homes, their families, and their very survival. They have nowhere to retreat. As long as their nation's future hangs in the balance, they have no choice but to keep defending it. And I'm sure no one wants peace more than Ukrainians themselves. But let's be clear, Ukraine isn't longing for just any peace. Naturally, they seek a just and lasting peace, one that guarantees they won't be attacked again. And what we have learned from Russia's actions in recent years, well, the picture is relatively clear. Russia certainly wants to dominate Ukraine. It wants wants to weaken NATO and the European Union, and it wants to rewrite the security architecture of Europe to serve its own interests. And to achieve these goals, Moscow has broken international law, attacked a neighboring country, and spread chaos across Europe through sabotage and disinformation. But here's the hard truth: we must face this reality together. The outcome of this war will affect all of us, because if aggression goes unpunished, it might not stop with Ukraine. Other autocratic regimes can be emboldened to expand their territories at the expense of smaller and weaker nations. The security of Europe, the strength of transatlantic relations, and the international order based on rules and respect, these are all at stake. So far, Russia's war has backfired on itself. NATO has grown stronger. Finland and Sweden joining the alliance. Ukraine has started formal accession negotiations with the European Union. Moldova and Georgia have become EU candidate countries. And Europe has reduced its dependence on Russian energy and united in viewing Putin's regime as a security threat. Together, Europeans have provided over 134 billion euros in support for Ukraine, including economic, military, humanitarian aid, and even assistance funded by frozen Russian assets. At the same time, it must be acknowledged that the war has indirectly affected energy prices in Europe and has become a significant topic in election campaigns in several countries. The consequences of the war in Ukraine are also being felt in Africa, in the Middle East, in the Indo-Pacific, the Korean Peninsula, and elsewhere. So what can we do? This war was started by Vladimir Putin, and it's in his power by withdrawing Russian troops from Ukraine. Until that happens, we must keep the pressure on Russia, not Ukraine. Europe must become stronger militarily, deepen its cooperation with allies, and prepare for what could be years or even decades of containing Moscow. And here's what I want to leave you with. This isn't just Ukraine's fight. It's a fight for every nation that believes in freedom, in sovereignty, and in the rule of law. Our support matters, militarily, economically, morally. It makes a difference. Together we can really help build a future where aggression is not rewarded and the peace is built on justice and security for all. Thank you very much for having me, and I wish you all excellent rest of the day.
I can invite Chairman Rossi, the Interagency Council for public hearing in Kansas and Missouri. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Daniel. Can you hear me okay? All right. Very good. Well, thank you to the IRC for asking me to moderate this program. As Evan stated, and as my Consul General Yakub Teshny stated, this couldn't be a more timely and important topic. So I'm really also honored to have our two speakers here with us. Let me start first with a little personal story about Ukraine. I don't have a lot of experience. I haven't lived there, but thank you. I haven't lived there, but I do have family in the Czech Republic, and Czech Republic, former Czechoslovakia, the Slovak eastern borders on with Ukraine. I've asked my family in the Czech Republic about the influx of Ukrainian refugees, and they at first, you know, it was viewed as temporary. They're there for a short period of time to provide some protection and safe haven until they can go back to Ukraine. Well, that short temporary period has turned into something much longer. And now, they're quite accepting for the most part, majority, not everyone, but the majority is accepting of Ukrainian refugees. They have assimilated, and Ukrainians have assimilated into really daily life in the Czech Republic. The government has offered aid and assistance. They have jobs, their children are attending schools. They're providing some healthcare assistance. So the Czech Republic, along with other neighboring countries, Poland, Slovakia, and several others, have taken in a lot of Ukrainian refugees, actually almost 6 million, I believe, in total. So my family also is, they're accepting as well of Ukrainians and feel that they're probably the ones that are there, most likely are there to stay. So with that, I would like to invite our speakers up. Let me introduce them, and then we'll get started. First, Dr. Alan Holiman. He is professor and dean.
Not a dean.
Department.
Not a dean.
Oh, okay, sorry, professor at the Department of Political Science at William Jewell College. He has several degrees, BA in poli-sci from the University of Arkansas, a couple of master's degrees, one in poli-sci from the Ohio State University, and one in Russian and East European Studies, and then his PhD in poli-sci. He, I found this online, so I hope I also found the dean online, so I don't know how accurate it is. But some of his top tags that his students say about him, he gives good feedback. Beware of pop quizzes. He's respected and he's a tough grader, so. And then let me also introduce our second panelist, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Shealy, who goes by Drew, is currently an instructor at the Command General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. He is with the Department of Joint Interagency and Multinational Operations. Drew has served in the Army for 20 years, beginning as an air defense artillery officer before transitioning to Europe, Eurasia as a foreign area officer. His work has included being a Russian analyst in the Defense Intelligence Agency and Joint Staff, and a member of the Defense Attaché Office at the U.S. Embassy in London. He received his Master of Arts in International Studies from the University of South Carolina. He studied Russian and Ukrainian at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, and in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Drew. All right, we're going to start with some questions and goes back and forth between our two speakers. Let me start from a military perspective with Drew. How do you assess the strategic significance of Ukraine's geographical position in the context of the broader European security framework?
First off, I'd like to say thank you for having me. It's also important I note that kind of my comments here are based off like my experiences and all this. It's my personal opinions. It's not the U.S. Army or Department of Defense or Army University or CGSC. So with that being said, I think if you look at militarily, clearly you hear lots of times in the media and different sources talking about Ukraine being a buffer area. To me, this kind of drives me crazy because it's not just a total as a buffer area between stuff. It's its own sovereign country, and it's treated as such. To me, looking at militarily, it is important as it is the route back and forth, the avenues of advance for both the Russians or NATO forces to reinforce kind of the Russian front as it comes along. Geographically, it's also clearly important to control the Black Sea. As Russia, took over Crimea and tries to continue their presence in the Black Sea. I'll leave that. Lastly, I think it's kind of really important to look at Ukraine as part of the broader military structure to have to counter the Russian narrative in the region. So even though if it's not aligned to NATO, if it's still, pro-Western ideals, pro-liberal democracies, that in itself, kind of the existence of that is important to give military legitimacy to all forces, and certainly political legitimacy. I'll stop there and think that there's a follow-up.
Thank you. One more for Drew, especially given what's been in the news the last day or two. US has been involved in supporting Ukraine in various ways. How do you view the role of the US military assisting shaping the conflict's trajectory? And then what is the military's outlook of long-term effectiveness of this aid?
So I think the fairly obvious benefits of US material aid over the course, certainly in the beginning phases, helping prevent Russian air superiority and kind of counter some of their armored front, with our javelins and in-laws, stingers, this type of stuff. Since then, I think some of our military assistance, including like intelligence, security, certainly long-range fires, continued air defense, and all that stuff, has enabled some of the counterattacks we've seen success on the Ukraine side, and has helped slow the Russian advances. I think long-term wise, the really American and certainly European security assistance as a whole, really the goal is to create, as the war comes in, create a kind of stable Western military that's capable of integrating with our forces and interoperable with our forces should we be needed in the European theater. And so really we're looking to create not just kind of the immediate, but kind of a long-term, fully functioning, fully integrated NATO standard force as we come about it. And really that should help set up for the next decades of European security.
Thank you. Moving over to Alan. First question, how does the war in Ukraine fit within the broader trends of post-communist states and political and economic trajectories politically, or particularly regarding Russia's actions?
Well, in one way, Ukraine is unique. Broad trajectory. Putin is involved in the project. It is making Russia great. It is a project he has articulated clearly in his article in the Russian press the summer before the 2022 invasion, where he laid out this case that Ukraine is not a real nation. It's part of the Russian people, part of Russia's patrimony, that the creation of the Ukrainian state was a mistake. He believes that. On the night that he announced the invasion of 2022, he reiterated the exact same things on television and he did with great anger. We can look at it inside and say, Ukraine is an independent country. There is a nation there. It has a destiny. It has a people. It is a sovereign state. It is an evolving democracy. It's an imperfect one, just as ours is. It has been for 200 years, but it clearly crosses that threshold that most people would say it's a democracy. There's a form of law there. Elections matter. They are regular. Change governance through them. There is government work. Susan Fisher had very crudely. It's a democratic country. Putin doesn't believe it. He genuinely does not believe it. Where he gets his information, partially from his intelligence services and from his cronies and friends, and those on his staff, and we know are reluctant to bring bad news to the Tsar. He doesn't spend much time on the internet. He has read a lot of crackpot Russian history, bad history, that he has somehow assimilated into his world. He thinks that Ukraine belongs to Russia. He thinks Russia has a right to control it. He thinks it. he doesn't have that intensity of thought toward many of the other Soviet states. Ukraine's special. It's part of the founding core of Russia. And so his attitude toward it is different than toward the other states. He's quite serious. He's not willing to give up out of this war effort until he's made to feel clean. Here is some power position. That's how I would shortly answer that question.
Next, how do you view the war's potential impact on the future of the European Union, especially in terms of membership and cohesion?
I think that depends on the European Union. Because the European Union is self-evolving in all kinds of ways. I mean, it started out as a common market, into a single market mechanism, and now it's acquiring certain features of a proto-state. So, how will it affect the European Union? Well, first of all, the European Union is taking on more security responsibility. And it is actively involved in supplying economic aid to the Ukrainians and making sure that their markets continue to work and that there's some sort of functioning economy. Ukraine is a candidate member of the European Union. In other words, it has been given candidate status. Negotiations are underway for the government of Ukraine to begin to enact into Ukrainian law portions of the community law of the European Union to redesign its institutions to meet certain standards for institutional and economic reform that would allow it to be ready for full accession to the single market. So Ukraine is well on the way to this mark there. The European Union countries consider Ukraine part of Europe and rightly to be part of it, and agree that it should be a decision of the government of the European people to continue their European integration. As long as the European Union wants to defend that stance, I think it's going to be greater cohesion because they're going to have to sacrifice what they do in terms of policy and have a coordinated policy in Russia.
Thank you. Moving from the European Union to NATO, something that's near and dear to me, we just celebrated last year in 2024, the 25 years of Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland joining NATO. So I want to shift back over to Drew and ask a question about NATO. How do you think NATO's role in the coordination of multinational forces will impact the conflict in Ukraine moving forward, particularly in terms of preventing escalation?
So I think NATO, the European response has been, it was very surprising as he debated all this. I think he's still fully trying to grasp the implications of what NATO has become, and that is not only nations giving additional weapons and munitions to Ukraine, but also going further in that and strengthening and modernizing their own militaries. Certainly we've seen NATO expansion, as I mentioned on the video. I think all of this kind of is making Russia rethink its escalation calculation with NATO and Europe. I think if there was any doubt prior to Ukraine that NATO could actually get together and make a real battlefield difference in terms of moving supplies and operations, intelligence, that's been cleared up now. I think he now realizes when before he might have thought, okay, it's a possibility that we could maybe chip off a piece of NATO, a country here, a country there, and maybe NATO is not unified enough to actually put the fight. He's now saying that even as a non-NATO partner, we, NATO, and the European Union are standing together with the European country. So I think that is one of the main key things preventing escalation beyond the borders of Ukraine. And I think if you look at further Russian aggression, it'd be smart to look at non-NATO members and potential other places.
Talking about shifting back over to Alan, talk about the EU needing to strengthen, which peripheral countries in particular do you feel have the most at stake as it pertains to negotiations in the conflict?
Well, as it pertains to negotiations, rural countries, I think the frontline states. The Baltic states, especially Latvia, Lithuania, they're small. They used to be part of Sweden against their will. Those countries are different from other European countries. They have already done many things that the United States is demanding of European allies, significantly increased defense. They have done Poland has as well. Poland has taken in hundreds of thousands of refugees. Poland is acting as a logistical base to support the war against Ukraine. Poland has taken, and even today, the Polish Air Force scrambled fighters because of Russian attacks near the Polish border. I heard that on the radio driving down. So Poland is very much involved. Belarus has not stayed because Putin has managed to use Belarus as a staging ground. So the Belarusian people, street demonstrations or intimidation, aren't terribly supportive of their government. Because dictatorship is maintained and supporting the relationship with Lukashenko. It's like people don't like this. And the Belarusian people really don't have much of a voice in this right now. They matter. They matter. All the neighborhood, Turkey has a big stake in this. I mean, Turkey has already come out to support the return of Crimea to Ukraine. Today, the Turkish foreign minister spoke in a speech in which he said Turkey supports Ukraine's membership in NATO. Turkey has a stake in this. Turkey's been supplying Ukrainians with drones and other, and they've also been helping the Russians skirt sanctions with trade. On both sides, Turks have a lot at stake in this. And then the countries in the Caucasus, because Russia has less effort, less time, and in their politics, it's important that this end in some way. Where the collective is going to die some. That what's works. That's the same.
Speaking of, you mentioned, yes, Putin will expire someday. You previously said that until he experiences pain, feels pain, then things probably won't change. What do you think that looks like?
The ability to sustain this work. The ability to sustain the work. That's what I think. Russia has not done itself any favors through this war. It has spoiled relationships with all its neighbors. It has single-handed choose states to increase the length of its direct damage to commerce, its neighbors. It is scared of its neighboring countries that border. It's done itself no favors economically. It has done itself a real damage. There are tremendous casualties. The Russians have suffered. A lot of people are coming back. Toxins, PTSD, these place terrible strains on its logistical grid. Its railroads are under strain. It's more expensive to move freight. Medical personnel are overtaxed. I have things in St. Petersburg on these that I'm scheduled for a replacement for 8 months. And he says that most of the surgeons who are capable in St. Petersburg are either assigned to military cases or they're taking military cases in hospitals in St. Petersburg. He said, and I can't get these artificial veterans come from America to Europe and don't stuff with Chinese. sanctions. Sanctions. So people know it, the cost of living. Inflation is completely wrong, about 9% a month. The central banks will 20%. The lowest state prices. Cost of construction materials in Russia, 60%. These things and the losses and sustain that's the pain. That's an indicator.
Drew, with recent developments in making it more and more possible that there's a site to this conflict, what are the long-term implications for other Central and European countries as it pertains to Russian aggression? You touched on it a little bit.
Yeah, I think probably the most obvious long-term effect is the kind of renewed importance of military strength along NATO and Europe's eastern flank. So you have a permanent presence with the EFP of German troops in Lithuania. We have NATO battle group all along the border. I think the kind of days of a decade ago where NATO and Europe's really questioning whether the Eastern Front is still a threat is long gone at this point. Yes, you know, them playing Mediterranean issues, those are still there, but the certainty, the Eastern Front needs to be protected. That's the first one. I think kind of going back, I guess, up to the last question, you talked about NATO. I think in addition, NATO will see some of the other security structures in Europe kind of gain importance, whether that's the B4 or some of these smaller the CHEP organizations where you have groupings of 4 or 5 countries that say, okay, maybe we need a kind of more agile security structure to deal with things right away for when these emerging threats come about, to be able to react still you know, in a multilateral fashion, but kind of with more speed and sometimes kind of clunky NATO process can bring about. And then lastly, I think there is that this conflict has kind of truly opened up some nations' eyes to just kind of how far Russia is willing to go, certainly military strength, but then kind of a step back from that is all the attempts that Russians are doing to kind of question the legitimacy of governments and create problems in some European nations. And I think kind of everybody is now more on guard for some of these Russian hybrid threats, as they're called often. I think kind of the renewed emphasis on finding that, keeping track of Russian actions in domestic politics has certainly will be an enduring thing coming from this as people kind of squarely have their eyes from Russia.
So we heard in the news yesterday something from the United UN. For either of you, how can international institutions such as the United Nations better mediate and address regional conflicts such as the war in Ukraine?
Well, if you're asking me, and start with the United Nations, not a lot. Unless the structure of the Security Council has changed, and the veto of 5 permanent members, one of which is Russia, which has launched this war of aggression against Ukraine, violation of the United Nations Charter. Unless that is changing, it's not going to do much that Russia doesn't want it to do. I don't think.
Yeah, I agree. I think in order for the United Nations to be truly involved in this, the structure would have to change. I think kind of the most we could get from this would be additional peace forces, all that, reserve forces. So, yeah.
All right, let's move to, I'm sure there's.
But can I do one thing?
Yes, of course.
But regarding that vote in the United Nations yesterday, when the United States voted along with Russia and North Korea, as well as not ending Russia's aggression against Ukraine. There is a speech that was made by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, Sikorsky. Go to YouTube and type in Sikorsky UN speech. It is 8 minutes, 16 seconds long, signing it to students. And it is an eloquent summary of the facts as they are that everybody knows. And it's how a leader of the free world should see. And I urge you to listen to that. It's on YouTube.
Thank you. I'm sure there's some questions in the audience, do you want a microphone in the audience or?
It probably could be tough, we could just speak.
Just speak, okay.
Okay, my name is Brogan, and I have a question. If you take away the Security Council and let it sit in there, how would you advise people to adjust the voting in the United Nations? Would it be on population? Would it be on GDP? Who would have, or would it be completely equal type? Because if you make it equal, you have all of their nations that would consistently, as they have in the past, place sanctions and restrictions on Israel. So how would you recommend that the UN be changed so that voting can occur so that the United Nations can more actively participate in the charter?
I have absolutely no idea. To be honest, I hadn't thought about it today until you asked that question. Some rotation on the Security Council, perhaps removing the vetoes of permanent members, perhaps increasing the number of permanent members. Because that number was set at the end of World War II in a very different age, in a very different time. And in fact, the Ukrainians have made the case that the Russian Federation really should not be occupying the seat of the Soviet Union, as it is not necessarily a legatee of the USSR. Remember, even when the USSR was in existence, the Soviet Union had a seat. It was a member of the United Nations, but so was the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and so was the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. So the Soviet Union fell apart. It was gone. Russia never had a seat. And the Ukrainians have raised that we have actually violated UN rules by allowing the Russian Federation to assume the seat of the Soviet Union. So there is that. But some change to the Security Council, I think, would be welcome. I mean, why isn't Germany there? Why doesn't the EU have a seat? Or something like that. I mean, it's worth rethinking that. And by the way, I can say the person who made that argument to me is the ambassador of Ukraine to the United Nations. His name is Shealy, and he was my undergraduate advisee at the University of Kansas. Many years ago, he came to me with a Freedom Support Act scholarship. Back when we believed in supporting that with money and studying. And so he's a Jayhawker. And if you've seen him defend Ukraine's interests in the United Nations, go Hawks.
Yes, sir, second row.
Why isn't it just a simple, immediate response is that Security Council vetoes, you don't have a veto if you're involved in the conflict. I'm not talking about all of them stuff, I'm just talking about this one. You had a nation that was actually involved in it. And that was even more pressure on us. That's just to go along because you would have been essential veto this time. But it seems to me that that's when you can implement fairly quickly.
That's a no-brainer. The night of the 2022 invasion, you can go on YouTube and you can see a video of Sergei Kislytsa, the ambassador from Ukraine, asking that very question because the chair of the Security Council that night happened to be the against the Russian ambassador. And he said, how is it that you cannot recuse yourself when your country is involved? And he asked that question point blank, so it's fair enough, but I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, kind of this discussion about, reorganizing the union and all that type of stuff, I think that kind of goes away from the main goal and how it's used, and that's just a forum for exchange of ideas and all this stuff.
Yeah.
I think even if you ended up having, changing veto powers around all that stuff, that, you know, countries and alliances and all that would still act. So, yeah, reform could make it more effective, but at the end of the day, I think that the UN kind of is what it is, and that is, an area for countries to come together and talk, air grievances. And certainly as a, you know, as an American, and I imagine the rest of the members of the Security Council, it'd be hard to volunteer where we get our own veto power, for that. So I think it's kind of, yeah, it's what we got, and I think the UN serves a very valuable purpose, and it's sorry, it's not great, but it works.
Let me do you.
Yes, on the issue of interoperability, is the Ukraine at work to become completely inoperable or operable within the NATO context? And if so, for how long? And I don't mean necessarily in terms of membership, but the ability to function as a united military unit were it necessary.
So I mean, that's something we're certainly working towards, you know, all the training that, Ukrainian troops are receiving in different NATO countries. Lots of the equipment we're giving them are NATO standards now. It's just incredibly hard to modernize and get to that force when you're fighting a war. So I think, you know, within, when the war wraps up, I think, we're still looking at, you know, another decade or two till they're fully able to almost be interchangeable. You know, even before this conflict, we were doing NATO exercises alongside Ukraine. So there is a fair amount of already, you know, working together already and stuff that we can do. But it's, you know, certainly they're not, I don't think they're going to depend on Russian weaponry in the future. And now their soldiers have more combat time on NATO systems than most NATO countries.
Have they been doing this since 2014 or even longer?
I'm sorry, but the NATO exercises?
Yeah, on interoperability.
Even before that, it certainly took a step up in 2014, kind of as that renewed thing, but. See, I think they, were first added to the NATO charters saying you get guaranteed, I think in 2007 or 8, I think 2007.
Yes, sir.
What would a peace council look like with Ukraine to face all of its, all the refugees that fled to Chernobyl, some of them?
My initial guess would be that there is a sovereign Ukrainian government still in place in Ukrainian security. That this won't happen. Ukraine will not be facing Russia. As long as Putin is in power, regardless of what's, and I think that would be the minimum, and in some hope that economic construction will actually work. I mean, most people, you know, I'm talking to some Ukrainian refugees here. They don't want to be here. They don't want to be here. And a lot of folks, I mean, there's some people that work Asia, but most don't. When you change a country, you leave your relatives behind, your friends behind, your native language, the sound of your native language, the foods that you're used to. And I work with them because my life is, it's hard, right? It's really hard. Levels that many people don't understand. And I think a lot of Ukrainian refugees would be narrowly happy to go home to a world, a country they love, a country that's real. their lives there and be part of it because they feel secure and have some hope for the future. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's incredibly tough. The kind of Ukrainian spirit, I think certainly has been, kind of reignited, during this war. I think, you know, as soon as it's physically safe, there'll be a lot of people going back, eager to help rebuild the country. I do just want to take a step back to the previous question on NATO interoperability and kind of make sure, I say, you know, even within NATO partners, there's varying degrees of interoperability. It's a continuous thing that we have to work on. It's not, you know, yes, you're interoperable or no, you're not. It's continuous, you know, done through operations and exercises. It's incredibly hard in varying degrees. So I just want to make sure I say that, you know, even within NATO, fighting with each other alongside is very challenging if we continue to work at it.
Sir.
Drew, there's got to be some apprehension in our military with the current president calling Zelensky a dictator and seemingly sucking up to Putin. And I mean, I'm sure Putin's peeing his pants with delight. But you know, you're kind of on unsettled ground given changes. You don't know what's going to happen.
So I think one of the advantages of being military is we get to stay out of those policy level discussions and execute, you know, the policies and orders as they come down. Certainly, you know, we all have our personal opinions, but I think on the professional level, you know, we are a civilian-led military, and we will continue to be that. And I think that's about all I'll say.
Okay, thank you.
Dan.
Yeah, a couple questions from our Zoom chat with regards to Putin. One, how dependent on the continuation of the conflict is the Putin regime in terms of economy and legitimacy specifically? And then is there a way for Putin to end the conflict without, you know, quote unquote, total victory?
Well, it's interesting when you look at it because, oh God, I don't want to sound like this. Okay, but we're basically on Putin 3.0. All right, the Putin regime has gone through three big transformations. He was trying to figure out a way when he succeeded Yeltsin to reestablish the strength of Russia's economy because it was in a tank, to bring the Russian state into some sort of administrative order because it was chaotic. And he thought he could do that by partnering with Western countries. Remember on 9/11, first of all, President Bush got from a foreign leaders offering assistance to help the United States, offering Russian intelligence assets, everything. But how much? I mean, he made state visits to Britain, made state visits to France, made state visits to the United States. President Bush, who resides in his soul in Slovenia, and so on. So he tried that approach. By 2007 at the Munich Security Conference, I mean, it was pretty clear that he did not think that was working anymore. He was quite upset that President Bush launched an invasion in Iraq against his advice, not taking Russian interests and considerations into account. He basically at that conference said, you know, this is a new Russia we're dealing with now, and we're going to change this unipolar moment to a multipolar. We're going to do it, he said, right? And so he started looking to 2.0. When he came back from the presidency in 2012, left for 4 years. And let Dmitry Medvedev play president for 4 years and comes back in office, and people protest that. That's when he begins to turn his Russian and begin to tighten civil liberties, tighten controls on political opposition, and really operate the system with as a fig leaf of democracy. We have elections regularly, but they decide nothing. They just don't decide anything. After the war, the big war starts in 2022, then we're done with it. no more competitive authoritarianism. It's a personalist dictatorship. And so he has rationalized, legitimized by this claim that this future security of Russia is in peril. Russia stands on this. It is surrounded by enemies and Nazis. Nazis, mind you, Jewish Nazis have taken control in Ukraine. NATO is on the move, is trying to draw Ukraine away from Russia, and this is our language. We've got to stand and make Russia great again, by God. Change the school curriculum, we're going to change the way public discourse, we're going to change the laws so that if you say war in the media and said special military operation, that's criminal offense. We're going to construct a reality that supports this. Laid everything on it. And he's going to have to come out with something he can describe to win. Now, of course, he's clever. In the media will say what he wants to say. But he's in a dilemma. I mean, I wouldn't want to say, not at all. I hope that answers the question.
Follow up that. How much of this Putin, how much is the Russian public? In other words, Putin is going to leave power at some point. Will this misguided view of the world continue because now it's baked into Russian society, or do you think it's unique to Putin?
Yes. No. I mean, it's really hard to say because, I mean, the Russian people are like everybody else. Some pay attention to politics, some really don't care. It's sort of like background noise. And some pay really close attention. When you look at Russian opinion polls, and there are some Russian pollsters, the Levada Center in Moscow does good. And it's reasonable that they use good statistical sampling methods. They have good scholars that are doing it, and as much as Russian polling can be accurate, their support is looking, and they haven't been closed down by the regime, I think, because they actually ferret out information that is interesting to those who are actually running the country that other people don't. And you see, I was reading a lot of polls for him, and it said that roughly 75% of those polled across the subjects of the Russian Federation express support for the war. But that's like Raymond's nature, that covers life. So if some pollster calls you up to, are you supportive of the war, not supportive? You don't know what this is, maybe the same. But they begin to break down the questions and answers. Do you want peace? And of that 75%, 30% said yes. They asked them, what would you not be willing to accept to get the peace? And the answer was Ukraine appreciated NATO. Ukraine So that's an interesting number. And people, professional, you know, how it reports. I mean, people are coming classically. They see this stuff that these make games in school. Weird national patriotic, all the way up into higher education. Weird military. These empty desks, portraits of dead soldiers sitting in elementary school classrooms to remember their homes. Two can go and die for a greater Russia someday. It creeps people out. They're tired of this. Putin's done a lot to change the culture and to be working on the coming generation to see the world as he sees it. So that's what really worries me. I hope that makes
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Some people are beginning to think that Trump is attracted to authoritarianism and power and materialism, and that the ways that kind of a game as he did. Because he was, in private business. And he's now put into play the earth beneath Ukraine by saying, give us half of your precious rare earth minerals, and we'll do something to help you, but we don't know what that would be. How do we stand by and watch that occur, not having any belief that he cares about the people in Ukraine any more than he cares about the people in other countries like Greenland? And I'm asking that partly of the military, because if the military has to support that, we have to go in Greenland at some point, or Canada. Right now it's a threat, but people like that have a tendency to flock together. And I guess the moral dilemma is that something that is the rule of law? And how do we deal with that as people? What can we do? I'm asking it of everybody, because I think it's the question of the day is, he's gone so far and his proposals are so outrageous. How can we not speak out in a greater way than we've done so far? You're not speaking out. You're a professor. Military can't speak very much.
I'll let the military go first. I would have to be
I would ask of the military prior to this week, what might you have said about what's occurred? Hard to answer that question either, but now that all your boxes are.
Well, I think if you're looking at use of military force, our society still, and the military answers the country. We swear an oath to the Constitution, not to the leader. And in order for military use to be used, it goes through Congress. That requires a build up the national will to support this idea. So I have not given any thought about military operations in Greenland or Canada for that matter.
But General Melly is gone, and so are the inspector generals who talk about the morality. So they're gone. You have no one to go to.
I'm sorry.
The JAG the ones who, when there is about the morality of what's trying to military, what they have to do. There are no ways.
So we still have JAG Officer Corps, still have a lot of that. All of our professional military education speaks to ethics. It's kind of from basic training all the way through War College. It's all about Constitution, ethics before, during, and after war. That's an integral part of our training. And I'll leave it at that. And hopefully pass it over.
Okay, I answer your question, what? A lot. For those who care, who are actually paying attention to this, call your members of Congress and your United States senators and ask them to exercise their powers to defend the rule of law. Now, given the current crop that we have elected, Missouri, chief who's responsible for that,
And Kansas.
they may not care. But they value their place in the Emerald City very much. And many of them, I suspect, rather than looking upon their position as a position of stewardship, view it as a career. This is not a service I perform. This is who I am. And therefore, a single call may not make a difference, but lots of calls do. They look at the volume, they measure the temperature when they come home, go to a town meeting and give them 1-4, ask the question. Do you stand up for the law? Stand up for the law. And then people, when we talk to our friends and our family, to talk honestly about the responsibilities we all have and to confront false information, we know it, and doing the spirit of love, because we've all got to share this country. We all. And so the biggest problem's us. We met the enemy and he is us. But you know, A.L. Mencken, the old political writer in the 1920s once said, democracy is a form of government based on the principle that the common man deserves what he gets, what he votes for, he deserves to get a good damn one. And so we're the big problem.
I know there are more questions, and I think both Alan and Drew will take your questions after the program, but I want to thank very engaging conversation. Thank our speakers, panelists, Drew Shealy, and all. Thank you very much for your comments today. Appreciate it.
Moderation, very much appreciated. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out to this IRC program today. Please stay tuned to our emails, to our website. Hope to see you at a program soon, and go check out the Czech National Assembly. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.